Who is the current Speaker of the House?
Oh, the guy that cries, and I don't know his name.
29% of those Americans that were asked could not name the vice president.
Don't even know.
Donald Trump today unveiled his choice for press secretary.
Reince Priebus will serve as Trump's chief of staff.
Congressional redistricting.
Separation of powers.
Shall appoint ambassadors.
The filibuster.
Foundation. Judges of the Supreme Court.
Civics 101.
I'm Virginia Prescott, and this is Civics 101, the podcast refresher course on some basics you should have learned in high school, U.S. history, and government classes, but may have forgotten. Each week throughout the first 100 days of the Trump administration, we will answer one question, like what does a chief of staff do? What is gerrymandering? And what really happens when you call a member of Congress to register your opinion? Today we're looking at how power gets covered and reported from the White House press corps, and Scott Horsley is our guide on the inside. He's NPR's senior White House correspondent, and he's been on that beat since 2009, so he knows a thing or two about what goes on in the White House briefing room. Now, while there's no specific call for a White House press corps in the Constitution, freedom of the press to hold our elected officials accountable is a bedrock of our democracy. I asked Scott how he envisions his role as a White House correspondent.
Well, you're right. There is nothing in the Constitution that says that there ought to be 49 seats in close proximity to the Oval Office for D.C.-based reporters. But right there in the First Amendment, the founders were very much aware of the importance of a free press and the watchdog function that we play. And we see our role as being the eyes and the ears of the American people who can't physically be there and don't have the time to be there in a watchdog role for themselves. So we're there watching for all the people who want to know what the president and his team are up to.
What's a typical day for a member of the White House press corps?
Well, there's no such thing as a typical day. Every day is different, and certainly the opening days of any administration are particularly interesting and volatile, and at some point, that kind of opening frenzy will, we hope, settle down just a little bit. And then there's a rhythm of the president doing kind of public events where he's making a statement, meeting with people on camera, sort of trying to make a point through his persona. Then there are private closed-door meetings, sometimes with lawmakers, sometimes with members of his cabinet, to influence the direction of legislation or influence the direction of regulation. We've seen this president saying he wants to roll back regulations in a big way. We've seen him talk about trade in a way that's maybe at odds with members of his own party on Capitol Hill. So we're still sort of trying to sort out, which of the statements that he made on the campaign trail and which of the statements he's made in the White House are going to prove out.
But you do show up, like your colleagues, every day at the White House press corps briefing?
Well, at NPR, we have, during the Obama administration, we had 3 of us who covered the White House. We've upped that a little bit to have 4 of us covering the White House in the Trump administration. So not all of us show up every day. Maybe one of us will be there physically at the White House. Another one might be out in the country somewhere talking to voters. One of us might be back at headquarters monitoring executive orders that the president's put out. So there's a lot to keep an eye on, but one of us is certainly there. Our seat in the press room is not quite front, but center. We're in the second row center seat, so we're not quite a front row seat, but a prominent seat to kind of watch the daily briefing.
So at that daily briefing, what don't we know or see that goes on?
Well, you can see it all. I mean, for better or worse, the daily briefing, at least ever since the Clinton administration, has been on live television. Mike McCurry, the press secretary in the Clinton White House, who allowed that to be a daily televised event, has sometimes said that was his biggest mistake. And there are plenty of us, I think, who would agree, because once they put it on camera, for all the gains in transparency and civic education, it unfortunately sort of turned the daily briefing into less of an exchange of information and more of a kind of a piece of performance art, where you have a lot of the reporters and the press secretary kind of posturing for the TV cameras and the audience on cable news or on C-SPAN. But what you don't know, I guess maybe is if you don't follow it regularly, maybe just how little actual information is conveyed at those briefings. They run, typically in the Obama era, they ran about an hour, and it was often sort of the least informative hour of my day. I might learn more making phone calls or reading position papers or talking to people behind the scenes. But what it is an opportunity to get a spokesperson for the president on camera, on tape, saying something.
But that is criticism about the White House press briefing daily, that there is no real news made there. I'm going to go further with critics saying it's a stenography pool at the White House press corps, passing on whatever talking point the administration is on for the day. They're rarely covering real news. And now presidents have Twitter to get their message out. So what is your case, Scott, for why the White House press corps matters and is necessary?
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of a lot going on in that question, as the press secretary himself might say. We do get critique for being stenographers. We don't see that as our role. On the other hand, I sometimes get criticism that I don't do enough stenography. And it's interesting. The people who are making those criticisms have changed a lot with the change of party in control of the White House. When Barack Obama was in the White House, there were Democrats who thought I should maybe just pass on more of what the president and his staff said in an unfiltered way and more uncritically, while Republicans would complain that I didn't challenge them more. Now it's just the opposite in terms of the party that's doing the complaining, the party that wants more stenography. But no, our role is not simply to write down what the president or his spokespeople say and then pass it along unfiltered or uncritically. It is to probe and to examine and to also hold it up to other pieces of evidence. You know, if Sean Spicer comes out and says this is the largest crowd to ever witness a presidential inauguration in history, period, it's our duty to say, well, here are some other pieces of information that contradict that. In this case, flatly disprove what the press secretary said. There are lots of cases that are not as black and white as that, where, you know, the administration will argue that XYZ has happened in the economy, and you might say, well, that is either because of or in spite of or partly because of and partly in spite of some action that the administration's taken. So it is part of our role is to certainly listen to what they have to say, hear them out, but also challenge, probe, and introduce other information, try to provide context, try to provide meaning.
What kind of relationship do you want to have with the White House press secretary? Obviously, you're trying to vet their information that they're putting out there. And as you said, you're there for the American people.
Yes, and the relationship is necessarily adversarial. It's adversarial by design. We're not supposed to just be tools of the White House. But on the other hand, it doesn't have to be ugly. It doesn't have to be hostile. It can be businesslike. We certainly had adversarial relations at times with the Obama administration. I spent part of that time serving on the Correspondent Association, which is sort of the liaison between the working press and the White House. And we certainly had complaints about usually restrictions on what press access might be to the president or his aides, or the terms under which information was distributed. We certainly had an adversarial relationship at times, and it's the nature of the job that you're always pushing for more access. The White House staff is always sort of pushing to control their message. It has been somewhat more adversarial in the opening moments of the Trump administration, but we had some encouraging signals during the first formal briefing on Monday that Sean Spicer understands that it's in no one's interest if we're just in open warfare. It doesn't help them to always be openly fighting with the press corps, and it doesn't help us if we can't get information from the White House staff. You mentioned Donald Trump's Twitter feed. As technology has evolved, presidents have had more of an opportunity to spread their message over the heads of or without going through the filter of the White House press corps. That's not absolutely new. You could say that Franklin Roosevelt's fireside chats were a way to reach out directly to the American people on the radio without having to go through the newspaper reporters who dominated the press corps at that time. Barack Obama was masterful in circumventing the White House press corps through the use of the White House website, his own video news releases. And so what Donald Trump is doing with Twitter is different in degree maybe, but it's not different in substance.
All right, I've got a logistical question about the press briefing room. How does the seating work? Does an administration assign correspondents to certain seats, or first come, first serve?
For most of the period that there has been a press room, the White House staff has found it to their advantage not to assign the seats in the briefing room, but to let the reporters themselves make that determination of how the seats would be assigned. Early in the Ronald Reagan administration, Larry Speakes did do the seating assignment himself. That was Reagan's press secretary. But most press secretaries after that have decided it's better to let the reporters themselves decide how to allocate the seats. But if the Trump administration decides to shake that up, they may try to do that. We'll see.
Well, as president-elect, Donald Trump did shoot down Jim Acosta, the CNN reporter. If there are threats of being evicted or being chastised publicly by the president, is that going to have a chilling effect on the kinds of questions that White House correspondents ask in those briefings and in other situations with the press?
Being excluded from a press conference would certainly have a chilling effect. And the White House Correspondents Association has said that we would object strenuously if now President Trump or any of his aides tried to exclude working reporters from either the briefing room or from presidential press conferences. Being ignored by the president or even being chastised or belittled by the president won't necessarily have a chilling effect on the press corps. We're grown-ups. We have thick skins. We're used to being berated by our by our listeners, by our readers, by the politicians we cover. So the fact that Donald Trump engaged in sort of a shouting match with Jim Acosta of CNN, that was maybe more visible than what we usually see in the decorous presidential press conferences or news conferences by President-elect. But that in itself, I don't think will have a chilling effect. There have also been questions about, how the rest of the press corps responded when then President-elect Trump refused to take a question from Jim Acosta of CNN.
Right.
There have
Calls
been
for solidarity. Everyone else should have asked the question, that kind of thing.
Some who've suggested that we all should have asked Jim's question for him. I don't necessarily disagree with that, but as one of my colleagues, Glenn Thrush, formerly of Politico, now with the New York Times, pointed out, Barack Obama always came to a press conference with a list of reporters that he planned to call on, and he generally stuck to that list, and other reporters could jump up and down and raise their hand, and the president didn't call on them. He didn't make a scene of it the way that Donald Trump did with Jim Acosta, but there was never some expectation that every reporter had a right to ask his question of the president, or if denied that right, that other reporters then had an obligation to ask that question for him or her. So it may at times be a useful strategy, and we may occasionally adopt that strategy, but it's always been the case that presidents call on some reporters and don't call on others.
So, Scott, you are not an academic or a civics scholar, but as a practitioner, what is the most important thing that people should know about the role of the White House press corps, the big takeaway?
We are not here to influence the outcome of a debate or to play favorites or to help or hurt the president or his team or members of Congress. We're here to cover the news.
And we are so glad that you are there to do it for us. Thank you very much for speaking with us.
It's my pleasure.
Okay, lesson is over for today. We hope that you feel like you could now describe what the White House press corps does and maybe a little more about how our democracy works. Civics 101 was produced this week by Jimmy Gutierrez and edited by Maureen McMurray. I'm your host, Virginia Prescott. And if you recently found us on iTunes and you like the show, please cast your podcast ballot by leaving us a review. That will help other people find us and help create a more informed citizenry, one listener at a time. Just imagine how that could benefit all of us. Civics 101 is a production of New Hampshire Public Radio.